Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really glad to have with me once again Quinton Hennigh. He's the president and CEO of Novo Resources. It's a company that I am personally very excited about. It is, in fact, my single largest holding in my retirement account. Welcome, Quinton. It's really good to have you with me again.
Well, thank you very much, Jay. It's good to be here.
Always good to talk to you about your exciting project. You explained in the past on this show the Witwatersrand. It's the most remarkable gold occurrence on the face of the earth so far, and something like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think something like 1/2 of all the gold that's been mined in the history of man has come from the gold fields of the Witwatersrand fields. Is that right? Something like that?
It's a little less than half, but yeah, it's certainly substantial. Somewhere estimates are around 1.6 billion ounces. I think 5.1 or thereabouts have been mined.
Okay, all right. History. Well, I know I've seen a bar chart of the Witwatersrand and the Carlin trend compared to that, and it was like a little, almost doesn't show up on the chart compared to the Witwatersrand. But in any event, the point is that it's the most substantial gold occurrence that has been known to man. You explained on this show before that gold was deposited in the Witwatersrand in South Africa. Your theory, at least, is that it was deposited by way of a precipitation event rather than some of the more traditional methods that geologists have theorized about in the past. And as you explained, that this precipitation event had to take place early in the Earth's history, as photosynthesis was coming into being, as it was starting to occur, and that you had to have a shallow seabed environment, I believe, was another condition that had to be there, and you also had to have a substantial amount of time, millions of years, for this event to take place. Have I got the basics right in terms of your theory of the Witwatersrand, Quinton?
That's correct. You've got the overall gist of it. Absolutely.
Now, the thing is that you did a lot of work with Witwatersrand rock and with similar kinds of environments, geological environments in the past. The theories that most geologists believe caused the Witwatersrand to be deposited certainly just didn't seem to hold water, didn't seem to make sense in terms of the amount of gold that was located in that one place. So you set out to look for similar environments, and you came up with this northwestern Australia, the Pilbara Basin area, where you've focused your work over the last few years. And you've had some considerable success, I would say, so far, Quinton. Do you still feel that you're on to something that's very possibly another Witwatersrand look-alike? And we're not suggesting that it has anywhere nearly the amount of gold that the Wit has, but that it, at least geologically speaking, that it's similar, at least?
Correct, yes. If you look at the data we've accumulated over the past few years, it's pretty compelling. We're dealing with a very fresh, freshly exposed basin, say, in geologic terms. It's the same age as the Witwatersrand. It's about 2.7 billion years old, or a little older. But these rocks have been exhumed. They're relatively flat lying, and they've sat here and weathered here in Western Australia for the last few eons. So they're typical of Australia. It's deeply weathered. It's bright red. So the rocks we see at surface, they're hard to gauge exactly what it is. You look at a conglomerate, you see little pits of iron oxide after what would have been pyrite. So the pyrite's weathered away. You look at the rock, it almost looks like the texture you'd see in a baked cake or something like that. But once we drilled down and we gathered some fresh material, this would have been our core drilling and some of our RC drilling a few years ago, we found fresh pyrites. We found what are called buckshot pyrites. These are pyrites that were probably also precipitated and tumbled around a bit in that kind of shallow water environment that you were speaking to. We've also got things like carbon, for instance, in some of the rocks we broke apart last year in what was called a deportment study, where you break down the rock and study the mineral content. We found pieces of carbon, which is very interesting. These little pieces of carbon strongly resemble the type of carbon that one would find in the Witwatersrand Basin. It's probably a relic, fragments, if you will, of a life form that lived there at one time. I would add a bit of detail to the kind of description you gave for the model, that, as we know here on Earth, things are not static. They don't stay the same over long periods of time. So for instance, sea level rises and falls, and that environment in which those little buggies did their work. Basically, there was this precipitation event, and the bacteria were kicking off oxygen and triggering this cold precipitation. That environment would ebb and wane as you had sea level rises and falls.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing good evidence of that here too. We see episodic conglomerate horizons that are absolutely created by rising sea level as it cut across the delta system, and then we see channel-like conglomerates that come in after them after sea level falls. So
sure.
We're seeing a lot of the same textures, a lot of the same minerals, a lot of the same overall geology that one would find in the Witwatersrand.
One of the characteristics, one of the most exciting characteristics of the Witwatersrand, as you've explained to me in the past, is something known as carbon leaders or carbon reefs. You just spoke of carbon. You found these carbon particles, and that these are extremely rich layers or reefs of gold. And I think you mentioned to me once that not measured in ounces per ton, but in fact they're so rich that they're measured in percentage terms. You haven't found anything like that yet, your project there at the Pilbara, have you?
No, we have not. We don't see the carbon leader in where we've explored thus far. Now, it's possible that environment, that sedimentary environment, is elsewhere in the basin. You must bear in mind we have about 600 and some odd square kilometers at Milligan, and then another 1,200 square kilometers of land up at Marble Bar.
Mm-hmm.
That type of environment could well be here. I mean, we're definitely in the right neighborhood. But we haven't seen the carbon leader itself. What we have seen are chunks or plastic particles. These are pieces of carbon material that were broken up during sedimentation. They were kind of tumbled around a bit,
mm-hmm.
and they're incorporated in the conglomerate. So I would say that's the best evidence we have that type process was alive here. It was it was alive and well. But we don't see the carbon leader per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that might have been one of the reasons, perhaps, that the market responded the way it did recently. I guess it was during the PDAC or right after the PDAC when you announced. It was during the PDAC actually. Your 963.4 meter hole that was drilled down, and I suppose you saw the stock sort of creeping up to $1.40 or so. And then when you came out with the news release, it was almost cut in half, I think, basically. And there was one geologist that I know very well who knows your project and thinks highly of it. Said, yeah, well, that was really a stupid reaction on the part of the market because Quinton could have drilled over a few meters in one direction or another, and he might have hit something phenomenal. You just don't know. You mentioned it's just an enormous property. An enormous target that you've got to shoot at, and we'll get to the exciting news. What I think is really what gives me confidence in the project is the surface stuff. But what you weren't so disappointed with that result. I mean, I think the best intersection that you reported is something like 1.5 meters, grading 0.42 grams per ton, which of course at some depth isn't an economic number. But what did you see there that didn't dismay you from that drill hole?
Well, the thing that was encouraging to me was that here we are 3.5 kilometers from any previous drilling, any outcrops, anything.
Uh-huh.
We drill and we hit these sheet-like conglomerates that are absolutely clearly the extension of what we're seeing up at surface.
Uh-huh.
So we know that we're seeing the same beds. They're continuous over that distance. Think about that for a minute. You don't get alluvial like. Think a classic alluvial deposits. They're usually channelized and have a very small footprint.
Sure.
We're not seeing that here. We're seeing sheet-like things that continue on for kilometers.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that's the first thing that's highly encouraging. The second thing, this whole, like you said, the grades are not economic, but what does it tell us? Well, it tells us it tells us a bit about the geometry of this basin. Now we can start to understand where the shoreline might have been, where the deeper water. I would say that the hole that we drilled was probably in a distal or deeper water environment,
mm-hmm.
but it tells us that we need to now get smarter and look back towards the east, where we would be snuggled up against there's a structure, a fault, that was probably active during sedimentation, and that probably is the lead control on the system here.
Okay.
If you imagine it kind of like a hinged door. On one side, it's going to swing like the hinge, but on the other side, it's going to cause a sharp, break or sharp divide. It's that sharp divide we need to look at more closely and understand. If you look at the cross section that I put into this news release early March, I can't remember the exact date, but there's a cross section that shows several historic drill holes that were drilled closer to that marginal fault. These are holes that were drilled going clear back, I think, to the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
These holes collectively, I think there's 5 or 6 of them, hit somewhere in the neighborhood of, each hole had intercepts of over 10 grams.
Wow.
So it tells me, yeah, exactly. So, all of a sudden, you can kind of put the puzzle together and say, well, if we get closer to that fault, there's a strong likelihood that the grades might improve dramatically. It also says that the gradients here were probably steeper. In other words, the sedimentary environment was probably steeper than was present in like the classic Witwatersrand. We need to stay close to that fault and look for the shoreline or this shallow water environment there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's fine and dandy for people to speculate and to think that on the very first hole you're going to come up with a phenomenal intersection. That very seldom ever happens. If it was just that I was looking at, it certainly wouldn't be enough to cause me to have this as my largest holding for sure. But what excites me and gives me confidence, Quinton, is the ongoing news that you've come out with regarding the oxides. The shallow oxides would be the most recent reef that's been laid down in this environment, right? And you've come out with some really very good news in terms of the metallurgy, in terms of the geometry and the grades. What can you tell us about your prospects for building a viable deposit here from the oxides? And I believe, in fact, you're required under your agreement there to come up with a feasibility study by August, I believe, of 2016. But how's it going?
Okay, yeah, exactly. What you've touched on is the main thrust of our exploration at the moment. We drilled an area in 2012 that helped us generate a resource. It was a 420,000 ounce resource. The area that we drilled was a few hectares. It wasn't very big. It was, I'd say, no bigger than half a square kilometer. We then followed up with some surface work around that area and realized that the conglomerates that we're intersecting in that drilling continued up and around the margin of the basin. In other words, we found outcrops based on that work. We found outcrops that extended those conglomerates over a distance of a few kilometers straight.
Wow.
So we traced them along, sampled them. We got very good numbers. So it really woke us up and said, there is potential for a sizable shallow deposit here. Oxidation, like I mentioned earlier in this interview, oxidation here in Australia is pretty intense. So the rock from surface down to, say, 20 meters or so is intensely oxidized. There's absolutely no sulfides left. What that means is, any gold mineralization you find is going to be free milling. It's not going to be technical stuff. So that's also intriguing. We did a deportment study and some other work last year, some gravity test work that suggests the gold is coarse, or it's efficient, coarse, I should say, to do gravity recovery. Mm-hmm. We saw exceptionally good recoveries out of some bulk samples we collected. We collected a dozen, I believe, bulk samples that we released in December, early December. And if you look at that data, you'll see that the average grade of those 12 samples is on the order of just under 3.5 grams. The recoveries look like they should be. They average somewhere around 80% for straight gravity recovery, which is phenomenal. These are the kind of things that really make your toes tingle. You can then envision mining and processing costs that are very low, given the geometry of this deposit. These reefs, they're very flat. Mm-hmm. The topography is somewhat hilly here. So if you can imagine a hill a few meters high, these aren't huge hills, these are rolly hills. Mm-hmm. A hill a few meters high, you have a reef that's a meter or two thick in that hill. The material above it, which is largely sand pebbly sandstones and stuff, is quite soft. You can strip off with a bulldozer, believe it or not, and no drilling, no blasting.
Yeah.
You can literally just go up, scalp the top off of the ore-bearing reef, and then you push that aside. You don't have to haul it. You don't have to spend a lot of money, mucking around here. You simply rip the top off the reef, push it into the adjacent drainage, and then you can selectively mine the reef with tractile. So again, no drilling, no blasting. This is an exceptionally simple operation. Given the large area that we have of these, we can open up several. In concept, we can open up several little benches or pits that we have going at any given time, and that'll give us enough feed for a really, I call it sexy small mine. You're talking maybe 1,500 tons a day, 1,500 tons a day, something like that. Now, in terms of processing, and by the way, the costs for mining in such a scenario could be quite low.
I would think so, yeah.
On the order of $5 to $10 a ton, and it would inclusive of strip and everything. Like that's per ton of ore, right?
Wow, yeah. It's incredibly cheap, and then I can't help but think, of course, we don't know what the grades are going to be. Quinton, I know your first grade, your 420,000 ounce resource, which is over that small area, was 1.5 grams per ton, which is pretty economic for a lot of open pit surface operations. But most of them don't have the simple, easy metallurgy. Most of them have to do blasting and have to have more complicated equipment to remove the ore. And most of them don't have the ability to get rid of the overburden so easily, and so it seems to me, you mentioned a 3.5 gram per ton. That was from the bulk samples, I believe you said.
That's correct. If you average the 12 bulk samples, it comes in, I think, just under 3.5 grams per ton. Okay. On that note, I would like to talk a little about the results we're seeing here. We've drilled quite a few holes. We drilled 327 shallow holes to test this oxide target. We sample these holes on 1 meter intervals. So basically, this is an RC bit. It's a bit that chews up the rock into fine chips and powder. You collect that powder at the drill. You split it. We take what's called a half split. It's basically half of the material coming out of the hole goes into a sample bag. So 20 kilograms, which is, close to 50 pounds, goes into a sample bag, shipped to the lab. Now, the reason we have to take these very, very large samples is because the gold is coarse, it's nuggety, and we have to adequately, assess how much gold is in the sample. When these hit the lab in December, the lab was basically overwhelmed. The process component of this, taking 20 kilo samples and put them through all the machinery and whatever, was taking forever. So I worked with the lab and I said, look, we know that a subset of the samples we submitted actually have gold in them. Let's do an initial what's called a leach well analysis on the samples using a smaller fraction. So basically the lab went in, grabbed 1 kilogram out of each one of these 20 kilogram bags, and then they performed what's called a leach well analysis on that 1 kilogram sample. The leach well it's a cyanide dissolution. They actually put the rock into a container with a bit of cyanide solution, dissolve the gold out, and that's how they measure the gold content. Okay, so the numbers we are reporting are what I refer to as triage or preliminary numbers. They tell us which intervals have gold. And then once we have all of that back, we will go back and do the full processing on just those samples. So it saves us money, and it helps us focus on the gold-bearing reefs as opposed to all the rest of the samples, which are of no interest. So from this point forward, you're going to start to see, well, we do have a few triage samples to release probably next week. I think we have 6 holes left to get into in the next release. And then you'll start seeing numbers that are going to be subjected to the full processing. These require 3 kilogram splits. And what will likely happen is you'll see differences in those numbers because as you analyze more material, it knocks the variability you get with nugget effect down. So you typically see lower grade samples come up in grade, and then some of the real high spikes you might see come down in grade.
Mm-hmm.
But overall it gives you a much better picture. Usually you see a high grade once you do that.
Mm-hmm. So you said only about if I understood you correctly, the 420,000 ounce resource, 1.5 grams almost. Over, I think you said a 1/2 square kilometer. How many drill holes went into that 420,000 ounce resource?
I believe we had it was something on the order of 16,000 meters of drilling collectively, and I think the average depth of the holes was around 100 meters. So it was roughly 200 holes, maybe 180 some odd, if I remember right.
Okay, so now the 327 holes that you've drilled since, is that pretty much in a new area, stepping out from where your original resource was?
Yeah, there's a bit of overlap. We've got some oxide in that where we drilled that initial resource. We have some oxide there, and I wanted to drill that area again using the more robust sampling procedure we're following. Mm-hmm. But I would say 90% of the area that we're drilling now is new, and the resource that we come up with on this area is going to be apart from that previous one.
Mm-hmm. When do you expect to have an updated resource then?
We're shooting for the latter part of the second quarter or the early part of the third quarter.
Wow.
It has been a bit slow coming back, but we should have the numbers in hand and have this all modeled by mid-year. So.
Yeah. In your March 10th press release where you talked about the leach well technique, you also noted that you're looking at doing some test mining of reefs in several locations. Can you elaborate on that? Or you possibly even do some test mining well before you finish your feasibility study?
Well, we really see that test mining as a critical component to reach the feasibility goal.
Sure.
We've got 32 sites selected. These sites are they're on the order of a few tens of meters across, so say 50 meters by 20 meters area. Something where when we mine it, we'll be able to evaluate the cost of mining, but we'll also collect enough material, enough ore, say that we can adequately evaluate the grade and recoveries and all the important attributes of the rock. This 32 test pits, which are scattered across the area, should give us a very good handle on grade, continuity, and all the important aspects.
You have a 70% interest that you're earning in. How much money do you have to spend? How much is it going to cost you, do you think, Quinton, to finish the feasibility work?
Sure. We have a little over 9 right now, and the remaining work we have to do. Fortunately, most of the work we did last year was the heavy lifting. So we have around $2.5–3 million to spend on field work to get the thing to feasibility, and we anticipate getting that done by year end. We are also permitting, so there's a component here of permitting that accompanies the feasibility work. And in effect, we hope to be ready to construct or to talk about constructing a mine. Bear in mind, this is incredibly simple. It's not a complex processing plant or anything. So we're hopeful that we can be ready by the beginning of next year.
Wow, that's incredible.
We haven't touched on the processing plant, but to give you a picture of what this might look like, when we mine this muck, you'll see some photographs in our news release that show how the boulders in the conglomerate break away from the matrix, and gold is in the matrix, of course. And it's a wonderful rock to deal with because we don't have to process the boulders. We have to simply knock the matrix off, put the matrix through a crusher, and largely the gold in there is largely gravity recoverable. So it's incredibly cheap processing, incredibly cheap capex to build something like this.
It's fascinating to me. I mean, it's a very, very unusual project for sure. It's more like placer mining. Almost, isn't it?
It is, but it's placer with a lot more lateral continuity. Looking at the footprint of our system, it's very sheet-like, very predictable, and it doesn't have all the quirkiness of typical placer mine.
Right. Yeah. More the continuity is. I think you've been very encouraged by what you've seen with the continuity of this deposit. Again, you mentioned that that you're seeing those beds with that deep hole, the 3.5 kilometers away.
That is correct. Yep, it's a remarkable system. I think we are seeing a lot of similarities with your typical Witwatersrand type deposit.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is what makes this so exciting, Quinton, is not, you have sort of what I look at as the blue sky, the potential to find maybe one day, sometime in the future, the carbon reef that could be, it could be out there, but more importantly, right now, you're pulling together what to me looks like one of the most promising mining operations. And I mean, you're looking to do something on a small scale to start with, to get cash flow, to build up and grow your company organically, right?
That's correct. We see this being a very robust, it's not going to be a large, but a very robust operation, very profitable, and we can, out of the cash flow, we can then tackle the sulfide and then tackle the deeper sulfide and, et cetera, et cetera. This is something you grow organically.
I'm just looking forward to these numbers because, I'm just wondering if we might be looking at something closer to that bulk sample. But even if it's a gram and a half or so, with the simplicity of this thing, it looks really exciting to me, and the low capex, low opex as well. The drivers, I think, then are the obviously you're going to come up with a new resource. You'll be having sort of a regular flow of news, won't you, Quinton, coming out, continuing this year?
We will. The analytic results that we have coming back, we not only have the drill results that I talked about a minute ago, but we have lots of trench samples. We actually costined or cut across the reefs in outcrop, took bulk samples off of these. So we have literally, 600 or 700 costine samples that will be coming back over time. We have some more metallurgy. That gravity work we did last year was just a prelude. So we've got some detailed metallurgy that's going to give us a flow sheet for building a processing plant. It'll also tell us more. The samples we submitted to the lab are 350 kilograms. So it'll tell us more about that grade, that what the real grade is, what kind of recoveries we should expect, and the costs. To put this, the environmental data isn't what you call sexy, but we have no obstacles to this project. The environmental data that's coming back says we should be able to build this without any hassles. The concept we're pursuing, this scalping and whatnot that I talked about, we can reclaim it very easily. We seem to have a lot of support from the various authorities here in WA, and I think this is going to make a fantastic mine. So there will be news around that kind of stuff as well, which is critical. It's not as exciting as drill results, but it's critical to making a mine. So
it looks good. I'm just editorializing here. I'm just talking my book. Folks out there listening to this show realize that it's not that I'm disinterested in this. It is my largest position, and I could be wrong. Well, let me just ask you, Quinton, before we conclude our discussion today, what could go wrong? You know better than I, and I've been around this business a long time, but there's always problems when you set up a mining operation. What could go wrong here?
Well, you got to keep in mind Australia is a dry place. You got to have sufficient water to process.
Yes.
Now, we think we've identified some faults in the area that appear to have quite a bit of water, fracture-controlled water, and it looks like they should provide sufficient water for our small plant. We're not talking 10,000 tons a day. We're talking about maybe 1,200 tons a day.
Yeah.
The other things that we really have to get a good handle on, I would say the biggest challenge in this project is really assessing that grade. Because of the variability and the nuggety nature of this stuff, we have to get a good handle on that grade. So
sure.
Those test pits are critical. I would say, the test pit should give us, that kind of 90% comfort level. But, grade in the nuggety environment is always a headache.
Yeah.
Those are the biggest challenges.
Those are the biggest, water and grade. Okay. Of course, there's always risks, and we want our listeners to be aware of that as well. Anything else, Quinton, or does that pretty well cover the gamut today?
I think we've covered it. It's finally cooling down here in the Pilbara, so hopefully we can work a little faster and a little more sanely. The temperatures dropped from 116 down to maybe 106. So.
Oh, I don't envy you at all. It's a dry heat, though.
No, it's
No,
actually
it's
pretty
not.
muggy this time of
Oh
year.
my
Yeah,
goodness.
quite humid.
You know, I'll stick around here in my air-conditioned studio. I
Okay.
think I'll do that and let you out there with the snakes and the heat. I don't know. It's not it, but thank God there are people like you out there creating wealth, Quinton. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for being with me, and look forward to another update sometime in the not too distant future. Thank you so much.
Sure thing, Jay. Thank you.